All right, we're already hearing that Senate Democrats are setting some pretty strict conditions to work with Republicans on tax reform. President Trump is expected to make a forceful push himself. We're going to get into those conditions. One of them is no tax cuts for the well-to-do. So Gasparino is going to go nuts about it. Anyway, Americans for Prosperity President Tim Phillips, Fox Business's Gerri Willis, and the aforementioned Charlie Gasparino. Among those things, Charlie, no tax cuts for the top 1%. Don't use reconciliation, no fast track. No deficit finance cuts. That, in other words, that would limit the scope of the cuts by definition.
Right. So you'll see some marginal middle-class cuts maybe, you know, just as a political tool. It doesn't really, since Karl Rove pointed this out earlier today, you know, 99% of the taxes are paid by the top 1%. So if you start cutting middle-class taxes, you don't get a lot of fiscal stimulus from that.
50% by the top 1%. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. But you have to. Yeah. Is it 50% the top?
Yes.
50% to top 1%, 50% below. That's still a lot. The notion of fiscal stimulus, I think, comes down to the corporate tax cut here, and I think that's what they're focusing on.
So they'll get that at a minimum.
I think so. Now, and it depends on how much. I mean, if they take it down to 30% and plug every loophole, well, guess what? You got a tax increase, because right now the effective rate is 27%, and that's with loopholes. If they plug every loophole and they bring it down to 20%, well, then you get a cut. You know, you get something that.
Yeah, they are making this vanilla, Tim, aren't they? I mean, early reads on this.
I think it's too early to say that, Neil. And I agree with you. If you drop the rates down to 15 or 20% and clear out all the deductions, or at least a vast number of them, that's a better tax code. It's more fair. It's simpler. Right. It gives people confidence that when you say there's a certain rate, that's the actual rate, not the effective rate that you hear so much about. Also, I think simplifying from 7 brackets on the individual side to 3 and lowering those, or at least as much as possible lowering those, will bring simplification of the code and savings for people too. And the other thing they've got to do is they have to sell this. They have to explain it's not just about rates and graphs and charts. It's about genuinely simplifying the code, making it fair for people, unrigging the system, and getting job creation, where they have a sales effort to do as well to explain the benefits of this.
You know,
and we'll be part of that, Neil. Absolutely.
Yeah. Gerri, 3 Democrats did not sign this letter, this demand letter. Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, and Joe Donnelly, all from states that went big for Donald Trump, and they're up for election next year. If they can vote with Republicans, that gives Republicans more wiggle room, right?
All due respect to everybody sitting here, I just don't see much happening. I mean, we're talking about ideas and what it means and who would sign on. Let's talk about the calendar for 2 seconds. 26 days of vacation for Congress coming up by my count, if I have that right. And what else do we have to do? We have to get a budget. We have to raise the debt ceiling. You telling me they're going to get all of this done? I just don't see it.
So the November Senate vote doesn't look good to you?
I have to say, I just don't see a lot happening. And, you know, you talk about making it simpler, the postcard. There's no way in heck that's happening. They don't have time to do all those things.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be the big reform they wanted, Tim, but the November deadline and a substantial tax cut, what if it's just a tax cut, a respectable one, corporate relief, but nothing that was so revolutionary big as thought?
But reform actually can bring more of the transformation for the economy.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
And I understand there's a reason this hasn't been accomplished in a generation since 1986.
Well, she's very cynical and jaded.
I mean, we were all a whole lot younger last time this was done, 1986. But
she wasn't even born.
But they need to make a big effort here, because you don't have this opportunity very often. And if you go deep into 2018,
Republicans keep botching it.
But the payoff of real tax reform versus only a tax cut is so much bigger for
average Americans. But I don't know if they're going to.
We've got to go far.
I don't think they're going to go that far because of reconciliation and the need for 61 votes for a certain to get a certain amount. Listen, I think they're going to settle for something they can get, and it will be
maybe
pretty
a little
good.
Corporate tax reform, maybe lower taxes.
Let's just say they get the corporate
corporations.
tax down to 20%. That's a big tax cut. That's a pretty substantial corporate tax cut. It's reform in a way that people have been talking about for a long time. 20%, take it below the effective rate of average of 27%. you're going to see that will move markets. I mean, that will be a very big upside surprise.
But we want to do more than move markets, right? We want it to make the middle class wealthy, right? We want knock-on effects that help everybody.
But it does move markets. The reason why it moves markets, and you're right to challenge me on that, because here's why. It moves markets because it adds to corporate earnings, because corporations expand, and because you start hiring people. I mean, that's the whole notion of corporate taxes, why you should cut taxes. It's not just because you see the stock market go up. When you get better corporate earnings, businesses expands.
One thing
Let me bounce on the marginal rates, though, Tim, if the rich are left out of it.
We would argue that you ought to have cuts across the board and not pick and choose individuals. And if you get rid of a lot of the deductions, like, for example, they're talking about getting rid of the state and local tax write-off. That's a big one. That benefits primarily the wealthy, probably 9 out of $10 on that.
I mentioned it to you because Stephen Mnuchin said yesterday, most households paying the top rate won't get a tax cut.
Yeah. Again, lower the rates across the board, get rid of the deductions. It does help unrig things. But just on the point of tax reform versus a tax cut, 6 of the last 7 federal elections have been change elections. Americans want change. They want big things to happen to try to get this economy going and help their lives. That's why Republicans ought to go big here. I think there's a way for them to do that.
Suppose they do something crazy like this. They get rid of the state and local tax deduction. They get rid of the carried interest deduction. They close a lot of loopholes. They don't move the marginal rate on the top. They maybe tinker with it in the middle, which will probably give you some moderate fiscal stimulus. But they take down the corporate tax rate. Just think about that. Rich people could be paying for the corporate tax cut.
There's no way you get through the state and local income tax deduction getting rid of that. I just don't see that happening. You're going to have not just Democrats jumping up and down about that, but Republicans too.
From high tax states.
New Jersey, New York, you name it.
I've talked to some of the House Republicans from California. They're open to that. They are. And to your point.
So you think it's going to get done?
I do think they're going to get something done. So they're going to be tax reform.
Okay, think about it. They're going to close that loophole, and then they're going to keep the upper rate where it is. That's like insane.
Well, I hope they cut all the rates across the board. I do.
I mean, that would be a massive tax
They
increase.
need to cut all the rates across the board.
On small businesses, too, that file as individuals. I'm telling you, there's a lot of bad outcomes that could come here if you don't play this out right. I mean, you know, they're tinkering too much with the original
plan. You and
plan.
Gerri are very cynical and snide. Tim,
I think it can be done, Neil.
That's because we talk to people in the marketplace, right? And then you hear the objections all the time.
Well, I talk to people out in the real world. I'll be in Indiana tomorrow,
These
Fort
guys
Wayne,
are not
Indianapolis,
in the real world.
and they want to see big change in Washington, D.C. that actually gets the system unrigged, makes it ordinary. That's what they want.